But
Well, how's Laura tonight?
Couldn't find unmute. I'm good. I feel weird. I haven't been here in a couple months, so but I still have bees, so that's good.
You got bees? Well, good. That's a positive thing.
Yeah, I think that my bees they've just behaved so well the past few years that I think this is the summer that they are just ready to misbehave. So like the swarm hive, we're calling up the parent hive and the swarm hive, they were fine. And then we checked them a few weeks ago and the swarm hive didn't have a queen. So that's been a whole thing. I think they're okay now, but yeah, so it's been a little bit hectic with the bees this summer.
I get that. It's been a challenging summer.
It makes me feel better to hear you say that.
Well, April was really pretty nice. And my bees were bringing in nectar in April and boxes were starting to fill. And I'm like, oh, I got to do something. And they were building and things were looking pretty good. And then May turned off cold and windy.
Yeah.
And everything just stopped for pretty much all of May. And my hives, they either just stagnated or they went backwards.
Okay.
And then June was hot and dry, and July was hot and dry. And, we're finally getting a little bit of rain and cooling off a few degrees, but it's not been a great honey year for me. I don't know about the rest of you, but I have not made the honey that I usually do.
No, not at all. And now I'm nervous that I'm gonna have to combine the hives anyway. So I'm like scared to take any more honey. So
Yeah.
Glade, I'm kind of glad to hear, like I said, I got out of it last year and come back in this year now and I'm retired, but so I started with new hives, but they haven't even totally filled one honey super yet. Out of each hive, I've got 3 of them. They just haven't produced a lot. They're putting some down in the brood boxes, but I'll probably get a box off of each one is all. But they just haven't produced a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, things were looking really good. And I thought I was going to be way into the honey at the end of April. Things were looking, I thought, wow, this is gonna be the year. My bees, I thought, were all set up and ready to go, and they were looking good, and May was just a complete bust.
Oh,
I don't think they made a drop of honey in May.
so have you made some in a little bit in June and July, this part of August?
Yeah, a little bit. The bigger hives have made a little bit. The smaller hives it seems like they're bringing in just enough to keep them going, but not a whole lot of extra. Some, but not really. They're putting on a little bit of weight, but man, they should really be putting on some weight. So, that was kind of what I wanted to talk about tonight is what does a good hive look like right now?
that's what I need to talk about for sure. Because it's just like so iffy. Like we looked at him last week and I was like, I don't know. I don't know about this.
So if you started brand new and you started a package or a nuke, by now they should be well into that second box, if not into a honey super. And if they're not there, then you missed the boat back a month ago. And I hear that from some of the new beekeepers that are just starting out, that they'll come to me at this time and say, well, but my bees have, they've not even really gotten out of that first box. And I'm like, oh, they needed to be out of that first box in June. You know, by the middle of June, if you got your bees in May, by the middle of June, you should be adding another box. And they should, by the middle of July, they should have pretty much drawn out that second box. And, but, you know, like Kirk, you had drawn comb. So even though you started with, I assume packages or nukes.
Just the packages.
Yeah, I would have too with drawn comb. They probably expanded into that second box fairly quickly.
Yeah, and like I said, they've got honey supers, you know, for newbies. But I figured where they had drawn comb, I was hoping that I'd have more than one box of honey.
I think in
Typical year.
Other years, I think you probably would have. I think it would have been totally within the realm of expectation to say, okay, I'm going to start a package, but I'm starting them on all drawn comb.
Yeah.
They should expand into that second box and be into honey supers pretty quick.
And they did. They went pretty good at first, but they just haven't produced. I've probably got the honey supers, I don't know, just making a guess, probably, I don't know that it's, like, it's been 2 weeks since I checked almost, but I just wanted to go do a mite check. And so then I checked, and the first honey super is probably, I don't know, 60% full, 50% full. So it's not a lot.
Yeah, that's not. That's
you know,
a ton. And
they've put a lot of more than normal down in the brood boxes. It's been kind of surprised me how much honey they've got down in the brood boxes.
well, it's where you want it for winter. So
Well, it's there now, yeah, right. So that's not all bad, but it just seems strange that they weren't moving it up higher.
I think that was basically because there wasn't a real strong nectar flow coming in. I mean, there was some coming in and they were just putting it, down low, and they didn't feel like they really needed to go up higher, I guess.
Well, and I was thinking, it takes quite a bit just to keep that many bees. I mean, they're using quite a bit of it, just for survival.
Right.
And maybe it's just that I'm not bringing in what I'm typically used to seeing.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think since May was such a bust for nectar and June and July were so hot, I don't think the plants really put out the nectar like they usually do. And I think that's what we're seeing is just it was too hot for plants to really put out the nectar, because the plants, in that the kind of heat we've been having, the plants conserve their moisture, and they're like, okay, I don't want to fill that nectar. What do they call them? Anyway, they don't want to put out that nectar because that's just moisture that's going to evaporate off. And
I didn't think of that. I look around and there's flowers. I mean, there's not where mine are at. That alfalfa never goes into bloom. They cut it before it even gets close. And I've looked at other fields, but a lot of the fields with alfalfa that's blue look really dry right now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not bright colored. It's just they shut the water off to mow, but stuff's looking dry.
I think that's just the heat. It's been so nasty. So you know, an overwintered hive for me right now, you know, normally would be essentially 2 deeps and several honey supers, at least, you know, 2 or 3 honey supers full. And I'm not sure I've got that.
Would the supers be deeps as well?
Well, I'm kind of fudging a little bit because I run all mediums, but
Right.
I have 3 mediums. You can kind of see in my background.
Oh, yeah.
The yellow boxes are what I consider their boxes. The bottom 2 boxes are the brood chamber. So I limit my bees down to 2 mediums for brood during the summer. And then I have a 3rd medium that is their honey super.
Mhm.
And my bees have filled that one, and they've started on a 4th honey super and a few of them into a 5th honey super. But normally I would have 5 or 6 honey supers, and sometimes I've already pulled one off. And I've had hives that have been into 7 and 8 supers. But you know, I have 1 honey super full for them for winter, and I'll pull out the queen excluder and put that 3rd honey super back down on that brood on the first 2. So I'll overwinter in 3 mediums, which is the same as 2 deeps.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. I think I'm gonna have to pull out the queen excluder because I have the same setup for the swarm hive. So I think I'm gonna have to pull out that queen excluder as well and give them that honey.
Yeah.
You know, Glade, if I was a starting beekeeper this year, I'd be pretty discouraged, you know, but
Yeah, it would be hard. Yeah.
I mean, but I don't know. I've never seen it like this, I guess, maybe, you know. I've never seen it with this, but of course I started out with new packages. You don't have the number of bees coming in that you'd have out of, I mean, it's a different ball game, but still, I remember back when I first started and I had non-drawn out hives. Production was, you know, I think I got 1 full box out of each hive that very first years ago when I started, you know, and they had to draw out everything. And so I guess that's what I'm comparing it to. This year they had drawn comb, and I probably got no more than I would have had back then with, you know, so it's probably just the year, I guess.
I think it's the year. I really do. I think this has been a tough year for bees.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not my first year, and I'm pretty disappointed. I finally got tired of it and decided I'm going to pull my honey off, and I had some hives that needed treated for mites, and I've got everything with Apivar on it right now. I'm just going to focus on healthy bees.
Well, and I think that's your next step for winter prep. So I'll be pulling my honey supers here probably next week. I've usually got them pulled by about the 15th, but I'm probably not going to pull till the 21st or 22nd for another week. And a lot of people in Utah don't pull until Labor Day.
They're not in the basin though.
Yeah. And what I found, you know, the first few years I didn't pull till almost Labor Day either. But what I was finding that I was having a hard time getting mite treatments on and back off in time for the bees to raise that winter brood and have a really healthy winter brood before it got too cold. And so I started pulling my honey a little bit earlier. And that extra 2 weeks kind of gave me the time to get my mite treatments on and get them off. And now I've got healthy bees raising the winter bees which makes for healthy winter bees. And I think that's kind of key to getting through winter is you've got to have healthy bees going into winter. But you've got to have enough time to raise those bees, and those bees are getting raised in September.
Yeah.
Middle of September to middle of October, that's when those bees are getting raised. So if you kind of back it up 3 weeks, which would be a full brood cycle, that puts you, back to the, towards the end of August to get your mite treatments in and get them in and off. And depending on what you use, like if you use Formic or even Apiguard, it'll shut that queen down for a couple of days because they're kind of strong those first few days. And it may shut that queen down from laying for a few days, which I don't really mind. I don't think that's really that big of an issue, as long as she's got plenty of time afterwards to raise all that winter brood. The only caveat that I would say with that is if you've got a older queen and she gets kind of shut down, sometimes she doesn't want to start back up again that late in the fall. Especially if you're running Carniolans or Russians or Saskatraz queens. They're really sensitive to the incoming resources. And if they don't have incoming resources, then they just shut down. And they may shut down too early and not raise enough winter bees. And I think that's where some people get in trouble is their winter bees are either not healthy because of varroa, typically, or they treat for varroa too late, and now that they don't make that what I call a fall turnover, because your hive is going to turn over. All those bees that are in there now, they're all going to die in the next 2 months, right? They're all going to be dead. And they've got to completely turn that nest over to winter bees in the next 2 months. So you've got really 2 months by the middle of October. Now it's getting too late for them. That queen's really shutting down. She's not laying like she was. And it gets really hard to do anything at that time of year. So in my mind, I got to back up, clear back into August and say, all right, let's get your honey off, get the bees treated for varroa, and make sure my varroa counts are way down. I want zeros, right? and then let them raise the winter bees. And even if I've got to give them a little bit of food in September so that they keep raising brood a little bit longer, I'm okay with that. So, I mean, I see quite a bit of pollen coming in right now. Doesn't seem to be tons of nectar, some nectar, but so I'm going to pull my honey, and then I'm going to kind of evaluate the hive and say, all right, do they have enough bees and do they have enough resources to get them through the next couple of months? And if they don't, I'm going to throw in, and I just about do it anyway. I usually throw in a pollen patty. I'll treat for varroa, and then as soon as that treatment comes off, I'll throw in a pollen patty, and sometimes I'll give them a gallon of thin syrup. Even though it's cooling off a little bit, we really want them to store that syrup. I'll give them 1 to 1. And some people would say, we'll give them 2 to 1, which I think is fine. if they need to put on some weight, yeah, I would probably be giving them 2 to 1, but I'm kind of, with what I see, and it kind of depends on what I see in my hives. If most of my hives are kind of light, then I'm probably going to feed them 2 to 1. If I think they've probably got enough honey stores, then I'm going to feed them 1 to 1 to stimulate that brood production. I still want them producing some brood through September if I can keep them going. Because that brood that they raise in September those are going to be my winter bees. So I want as many winter bees as I can get, but I want them healthy. So I've got to get the varroa mite under control. And I don't, Cade, you said you're using Apivar, which is fine. A lot of the commercial guys use it. Personally, I don't use Apivar. I'll either use Apiguard, the thiamol, or I'll go to Formic. It's been so hot though that you can't use Formic right now. It's too hot.
Yeah, that's kind of why I stayed away from it and just went with Apivar.
And that may be your only choice just because of the heat. Because thiamol is a little bit temperature sensitive. It's not quite as bad as Formic, but it is temperature sensitive as well. So we don't want to blast out that queen and the brood, which Formic will do if it's too hot. And with the rain that came through, I think if you had been prepared, I think you could have gone in yesterday and thrown in a couple of Formic Pro pads. And just looking at the weather, I think it'll be cool enough for the next couple of days between yesterday, today, and tomorrow. I think you could have got away with it. But then it's supposed to turn off warm again or hot again. And I think anytime it's above 85, I think 85 is their upper limit for Formic. And I don't even like it above 80, but if you can get a couple of days in the 70s in a row, with Formic, it's really those first 3 to 4 days that are the critical ones. If you can get 3 or 4 days that are below 80, yeah, Formic works really well and doesn't it will kind of shut down the queen, and they will occasionally, if it's too hot, they'll kill some of the brood, but it's usually not. I don't really see it in my hives if I'm really careful with temperature when I put Formic in. So that's kind of my goal at the moment, is next week get my honey supers off, and I'll probably use Apiguard unless we get another round of storms coming through and we get 3 or 4 days in a row where we're going to be back down into the 70s. Then I really like Formic personally because it kills the mites under the cappings, whereas Apiguard doesn't do that. And Apistan doesn't do that. Apistan is just that continuous treatment. As the brood emerges, then it exposes the mites to what's the chemical? Amatraz. You have to get those. I think the key is getting your mites under control quick enough that they can still raise the winter bees. And in the meantime, as soon as your mite treatments come off, then I'm looking at feeding and trying to decide, okay, are they heavy enough for winter? If If they are, I'm probably still gonna give them a pollen patty and maybe a gallon of syrup just to stimulate that brood rearing, just to keep it going for another couple of weeks. And if they're a little light on stores, then I'm gonna look at maybe doing 2-to-1 instead of 1-to-1 and kind of get them to store some of that syrup. I think your goal needs to be about 60 to 70 pounds of honey, which is going to be about 2 medium supers worth, you know, a full deep plus a few frames in the bottom box on the sides. And in my case, I like to have 2 mediums full. And in my setup right now, I have 1 medium that's full, and the second medium, they've got some on the sides. And after I pull my honey supers, we're going to get hopefully, we still get some nice weather and still get some nectar coming in. Sunflowers are blooming. We're going to have rabbit brush blooming before too long. And they can get quite a bit of nectar off some of those things if we don't freeze. And we get, you know, we continue to get a little bit of rain, they can still get some nectar. I'm hoping this rain will kind of kick some of the plants into gear a little bit and they start producing a little bit more nectar. And then I'll let my bees just whatever they store. If they start backfilling that brood nest, great. Because that's exactly what I want them to do in September. I want them to backfill that brood nest. Not so much in August. I don't mind them putting some honey on the sides, but I don't want them to pack that brood nest up yet. In September, if they start packing it up, that's okay. That's good. Get your queen excluders out of there. Don't leave those queen excluders in for winter. Some people like to leave, you know, they may have, I don't know, 2 deeps and 2 mediums, and they just leave everything just like that all winter. And for me, I think that's too much space for winter. The bees don't heat the entire hive, right? They don't heat all the boxes and try to keep them all warm all winter. They only heat the cluster. But I think it's harder for them if there's too much space. So if you've got empty boxes, get the empty boxes off. I don't think you want to leave those for winter. I think that just creates too much space that I think it's unnecessary. And then, you know, after I've treated for mites, well, I'll be doing it, you know, as I get into these hives and I start pulling my honey supers and I start kind of doing my last round of mite washes and inspections and kind of assessing where the hives are at. If I come across a weak hive for pretty much whatever reason, then I'm going to take my loss now and I'm going to get rid of the queen and I'm going to combine the bees with another hive. I don't think it's worth it. And I don't think the odds are in your favor to try to baby a weak hive through winter. I would rather combine those bees with another hive and make a really good strong hive with the extra bees that has a much better chance of getting through winter. If it's a weak hive, it seems like, you know, you feed and you feed and you feed and they just never really do anything. And if they actually make it through winter, then they're usually not that great coming out of winter next spring. And you're constantly babying them. And in my experience, it's not worth it. I guess I'm getting too ruthless too. If you're not going to behave, I'm going to get rid of you. So I think, if you've got a weak hive, I think you're better off combining it with a stronger hive and let that stronger hive really get set up right for winter. And that usually happens because the hive has got a problem, something's going on. And most of the time we blame the queen for that. She's not laying up, she's got a poor brood pattern. And sometimes it's not necessarily her fault. Sometimes it's because the hive is stressed. They don't have the nutrition they need. And that usually a stressed hive is usually when you start seeing diseases pop up. I had a hive just the other day about a week ago that I looked through, they had a queen. It was a small nook that I made up. They had a queen, they had enough, they were a little light on resources. And so I think they were a bit stressed, and that stress really kind of manifested itself as EFB. It looked like EFB to me. And so I just decided, okay, I'm not going to mess with this. I'm not going to try and get them over the EFB. I'm just going to shake the bees out and pull that box completely out of production, and I'll go scrape off the comb and not even reuse the comb. But that's what I'm talking about as far as a weak hive. Now, small hives are a little bit different because I have small hives. I've got about 20 nooks out here that are small. I mean, they're 5 frames of bees, 10 frames. Well, they're kind of, I've been feeding them, and so they're growing a little bit. But 2 weeks ago, they were 5 frames of bees. And I've been feeding them, and they're growing, and they're kind of moving into about 10 frames of bees. And what I'll do is I'll overwinter them as nukes. 5 frames over 5 frames. And some of my boxes are actually only 4 frames over 4 frames. So there's really only, my goal is to kind of get them to fill those 2 boxes. So I've really only got 10 frames of bees, or even just 8 frames of bees going into winter. As long as they've got the resources, they can do that. That's a small hive you can get through winter, but a weak hive you won't. And it's a little bit, well, what's the difference between the two? And to me, a weak hive is one that's just struggling. It's not growing. It's not, the brood pattern's poor. They're just kind of there, but they're not really doing anything. And they haven't really done anything for a couple of weeks. These nukes that I have, I've been feeding them, and they're growing. They're popular. Every time I get into them, I'm like, oh, there's 2 more frames of bees here. They need more room, and I think I'll continue to feed these nooks, and they're starting to, some of them they've had to draw comb. And so I've been feeding them really heavy to get them to draw out new comb at this time of year, which is hard to do. But some of them are doing that, and a few of them aren't. And those that aren't, I'm probably going to have to combine and just make one hive out of them because they're not growing fast enough. But these others I've been feeding, they're growing, they're small, but I wouldn't call them weak. Does that make sense?
When do you think, that does make sense, thank you. When do you think you're gonna make that final call for, maybe some of those hives that are weak, that aren't growing?
Probably by the end of the month.
Okay.
Probably by the end of the month. There's really not, kind of depends on what September does for the weather, but
Yeah.
there's really, if it's a weak hive and it's a queen problem, unless you've got a queen right now, trying to requeen a hive this time of year gets really kind of tough. Can you do it? Yeah, you could probably do it. But realize, we're back to the discussion we had earlier of, okay, so I get a new queen in there. She's got to raise a full round of brood. So that's 21 days before her brood starts coming online, right? Well, that puts us into the first part of September. And maybe she gets another round of brood in by the end of September. Okay, yeah, maybe she still makes it. But by the end of the month, if you tried to requeen, I don't think you'd make it. I think you're toast. So take your loss, combine it with, use that resources of the bees that are there to boost or, give another hive a better chance of getting through winter. And that's, when you only have one or two hives and it's like, I'm going to be down to one.
Right. Yeah, that's my predicament. So, I've been reading a lot about the combining method with just like the newspaper in between. Is that what you'd recommend if I decide to go that route?
Yeah, pull the queen out of the, keep the best queen, pull the queen out of the other hive. Put a sheet of newspaper over one of the boxes and take the box from the other hive and slap it on top. In 3 or 4 days, they'll all be friends. A lot of people will just, when they put that newspaper between them, they'll just take their hive tool and make just a couple of little tears in the newspaper, just to give the bees kind of an edge to start with as far as tearing it apart. And you'll be surprised how much they'll tear apart in 5 days. And if the wind doesn't blow, you'll have this really fine shredded paper outside in front of the hive on the ground that it's really light, fluffy stuff, but most people don't see it because the wind around here blows and it's gone. It's so light and fluffy, but it's just the tiniest shreds that they'll pull right off, and it's more paper fiber than it is paper. It's like paper dust bunnies. But yeah, that's probably the best way to combine them. Sometimes I don't even do that. Pull the queen out that I'm going to get rid of, grab the box, throw it on top of the other one and walk away. If the other hive's strong enough, it's fine. Now you can't kind of, you're putting the weak hive on top of the strong hive. And this really isn't usually the case, but if you get rid of the queen in the strong hive with the idea I'm going to keep the queen out of the small hive, if this was just a case of a big hive, small hive, you were trying to combine, then newspaper is probably the only way to go. If you just throw the boxes together, that big hive will overwhelm that small hive and overwhelm that queen before they realize that they're really queenless. And yeah, then it's not a good situation. But if you're going the other way, if you drop if you've got a hive that's too deep and you've got another hive that's only one deep and it's small and I would just throw that deep on top of the other two and walk away. I'm not even sure I'd bother with the newspaper. What else for winter? So get your varroa mites under control, 60 to 70 pounds of honey. If you don't have enough honey and it starts to get too cold, because once we start getting down into the about mid-50s, it gets really hard to feed syrup at those temperatures. You almost can't do it. It's warm enough in the day, but it's not, it's too cold at night. Then you've got to switch to something else. Either a sugar board or fondant, something else. And usually what I do, just because I look at it, 5 pounds of sugar at 70 cents a pound is $3.50. Even if I spend $5 to keep my hive in sugar, to keep my hive going through winter, to me, that's worth it, right? I'd rather spend $5 on a hive than have to go spend 175 for another nook. So I make sugar boards for all my hives. And I've shown this before, but I can show it again. There. That's what I just made some shims. The picture on the left is kind of the bottom of the shim. And I just put some, I think that's 1/4 inch hardware cloth on the bottom. And then I just flip it over and I kind of line it with newspaper. And then I just pack it with sugar that I've moistened with apple cider vinegar. And I just put enough apple cider vinegar in with the sugar to kind of make a wet sand, to where it will almost start to pack. And then I'll put 5 pounds, about 5 pounds of sugar on every hive. But if you do it too soon in the fall, like if you do it in September or October, the bees will go up there and they'll pack that sugar right out the front door and drop it on the ground. Why, I don't know, but they will. So I usually wait until about Halloween, 1st of November. And then I go in and pop the lid, put these shims on, put the lid back on. And usually by then it's cold enough that they'll not pack it out of the hive. They seem to think it's foreign substance or something and they don't want it. And they'll just pack it out of the hive if you put it in too soon. So I wait until usually around Halloween or even a little after before I actually put these on the hives. And then about that time, and that for me is just insurance. Sometimes my bees will use it and sometimes they won't. But I consider that pretty cheap insurance to get I'm going to spend $5 on sugar so I don't have to spend $175 buying another package or another next spring.
Hey, Glade.
And I'm in a case where I wouldn't do that anyway, but that's about what a hive's worth in the spring. A package is 150, $175. Yeah, Kurt.
I just wanted to run something by you. What I've done in the past, I've put the sugar boards in there, and in the winter when I try to sneak in there on a halfway day that I think's warm, I look at that sugar board. A lot of times, I don't know if I'm reading this right, but I've always figured if they're starting to pull a fair amount of that sugar off, they've more or less run low on honey. I think they'll take the honey first. And I've just used that as I keep track of which hives they're starting to pull that off of. And then I check them again. So to put, if I have to, I'll put another one on. I've never had to put a second one, but some of them will get eaten down quite a ways, you know. And I've just kind of used that in the middle of winter just to look quick. And if they're using some of that up, I figure they're probably out of honey, and I probably ought to watch them a little closer. Is that a good or bad idea?
That's exactly what I do. And I think it works really well because you can pop the lid.
Oh, it's quick.
And look real quick. If they're up in the sugar, they're hungry. That means they've probably eaten everything down below.
That's what I figured. So I better watch and put more sugar on it if it gets low.
You know, if they're not up in that up in that feeder, and they haven't even touched the sugar, then they probably still have plenty of food down below. And
yeah, some hives come spring will never have touched that sugar. You know, a lot. Yeah, most of them won't.
Yeah, some of them won't even touch it.
Right.
And that's where, if you go up to your hive, you know, as you're starting to get it ready for winter, and just kind of heft the back of the hive. You're not trying to pick up the whole hive, but if you kind of lift the back of the hive, you can kind of get a feel for how heavy that hive is. And then when you're coming back, you know, in January, early February, and you pop the lid and you're like, okay, they haven't come up in the sugar. They're not using it yet. Or maybe they are. And then if you heft the back of the hive, you can get a really good, quick feel of, if that hive's light and they're up into the sugar, then you know they don't have anything down below.
Yeah.
And if the hive's still heavy and they're not touching the sugar, man, they've still got honey. Great. Close them up, leave them alone. You can see from the picture on the right, this hive went through that sugar and pretty well ate all of that. Now the picture in the middle is when I put them on, and it was that particular year I was late doing it. It was into December when I finally put those on. But the picture on the right is about March, and they've eaten most of the sugar, and I was worried about them, but I wanted them to start producing a little brood. So I had some honey, and I just put it in some Ziploc bags and then cut some slits in the top of the bags. And you can see the bees have come up on top of those bags, and they're cleaning out that honey. And then I also gave them a pollen patty because I was trying to get them to start raising brood. So this would have been about March, middle of March. But some years I have hives that won't even touch that sugar at all, and others that'll burn clear through it. And so usually what I do is I take the shim that nobody's touched, and I put it on the hive that's been burning through it. And then, and I don't know that this is completely necessary, but I usually get some tar paper and wrap my hives. And you can see that in these photos, I've left, all of my hives have an upper entrance. And I've actually left that upper entrance open. That's the way I've usually done it. And I'm changing my mind about that. I'm getting to the point where I don't think an upper entrance is advantageous. I think upper insulation is. So let me back up here. So what I'm been playing with is go ahead and put my sugar in that shim just like I normally do, and then put a piece of rigid like 1-inch foam board on top of the sugar, and then my lid. And then closing off that upper entrance completely. So this gets us into that discussion of, should you have an upper entrance? Do you need to ventilate off that moisture? Here, I'll stop sharing. And this is an argument that the beekeepers have been having for years. Should you have an upper entrance so that you can vent off that moisture, or should you not? And the way I was taught, the beekeeper I learned from, the way he explained it is, okay, so you've got that cluster in there in the hive. They're breathing and they're expelling warm, moist air, right? Which they are. As they breathe and as they consume honey, there's going to be excess moisture. And that moisture needs to go somewhere. So, but it's warm, moist air, which rises to the top of the hive, hits that cold lid on the hive, and then condenses on the top, on the underside of the lid. And then as it, if it's warm enough, then it just rains right back down onto the cluster, which kills your cluster. Wet bees or dead bees. And so the theory is, well, let's vent off that moisture. Let's give it a place to go. So some beekeepers leave an upper entrance, not very wide, not a ton, and let that warm, moist air vent out so that it doesn't condense on the underside of the lid. And that made sense to me, and that's the way I've done it for a number of years, and my bees have been fine. So does it work? Yeah, I think it works. But the more I've studied this, the more I've kind of come to the conclusion of, well, wait a minute. If you live in a 2-story house in the middle of the winter, are you going to leave the upstairs window open? Well, no, I'm not. But if we close that upper entrance off, then that warm, moist air is going to hit that underside of the outer cover, and it's going to condense. And then it's going to rain back down on the bees. Well, by putting some insulation on top of the hive, now that top board of the hive is warm enough, because you've got this warm air coming up, hitting that insulation and warming that the underside of that lid. It's warming it up enough that warm, moist air doesn't condense on the underside of the lid. It works its way to the outside walls, which are now cold, and it condenses on the outside walls. Well, that's okay. If you have that moisture condensing on the outside walls, it's just going to run down the walls. The bees are in the middle. And now it's not raining back down on the bees. And so the last couple of years, I've started playing with that and closing off my upper entrance and putting some upper insulation, like a 1-inch or an inch and a half, or even a 2-inch piece of foam board on top of my, on the top of my hives underneath the lid. And the hives that I've done that with, they seem to come out of winter looking better. I'm not sure how to explain that. And they don't seem to have consumed as much of their resources. Some of them still got into the sugar, and I think that has to do more with the type of bee, like the Italians. They eat and eat and eat. But the Carniolans and the Russians and the Saskatraz, they're way more sensitive. They're way more conservative with their resources in the winter. And I had hives that I did this with, and they didn't even hardly touch that top box of honey, let alone got into the sugar. I mean, I came out of winter with some of my hives that still had a full box of honey, or nearly a full box of honey left. And I'm like, what did you eat all winter? But the bees looked really good. They looked healthy. They didn't, and they came out of winter really well. But I think you've got to think of it as, I'm either going to provide an upper entrance and a way for that warm, moist air to vent off, or I'm going to close that upper entrance and I'm going to put some insulation on top to handle the moisture. I have a couple of Apame hives. I don't know if you're familiar with them. They're a polystyrene insulated hive. And I have 2 of them out here in my yard. And last year, those 2 hives went into winter, and I thought, oh, they're never going to make it. They're way too light. They don't have enough resources. I'm going to be feeding them all winter long. And I'll be darned, those bees did not really consume a whole lot of honey all winter. I think an insulated hive, I'm beginning to think that is, for our area, is the way to go. And if you're not going to insulate the entire hive, at least put some insulation on top of the hive for winter. I was amazed at how little honey they went through. And they were sparse by the time they got into spring. I didn't think they'd make it, but they did just fine. I was really surprised that they made it that far. And they did great. So I think you're, as you go around the beekeeping community, you know, people talk about quilt boxes on top, and the quilt box has really kind of gotten away from its original intent. When people started putting trying to insulate their hives, they were using a quilt, and they would put it on top of the hive, but they didn't have an upper entrance. And so that quilt was acting as insulation and preventing the condensation on the underside of the lid, and forcing the condensation to happen on the outside walls. And then somebody said, well, we've got to vent off all of that warm, moist air. And so then they started putting holes in the quilt boxes. Well, now you've just defeated the purpose of the quilt box, and that warm, moist air is going up into the quilt and making the quilt all soggy. And now you're venting that off. And so you're not capturing any of the warmth, any of that heat you're letting it all out of the hive. And so, and then they've taken the quilt box and they've, you know, some of them use burlap and some of them use whatever. But I think we've gotten away from the science of the actual thermodynamics of what's happening in the hive. And I think we need to get back to, you know, what really happens when you put an upper entrance in the hive. You've created an airflow through the hive. And yeah, it's going to vent off that warm, moist air, and it's not going to condense on the inside the hive, which is good. But I think you've made it harder for the bees to stay warm and keep themselves warm all winter because they've got this convection current going through the hive, pulling in cold air from the bottom and pushing it out the top. And if you listen to some of, I don't know if you've heard of, his name's Etienne Tardif. He's a beekeeper in the Yukon. So Canada, cold, 40 below, and he keeps bees up there. And he's a bit of a scientist, so he's done all sorts of sensors in his hives. And he has shown that if he puts an upper insulation on his hive with no upper entrance, his bees, even up in Canada, consume less honey during the winter than our bees do down here. We're leaving 60 to 70 pounds of honey on these hives, trying to keep them going through winter. He's using half that. He's using 30, 35 pounds of honey to get a hive through winter up there. All because of the insulation. Now he insulates heavily on the top, like 6 or 8 inches of foam board insulation on top, and then he insulates 3 or 4 inches on the sides on all his hives. Interestingly enough, he actually leaves screened bottom boards open all winter, but the stand he has them on basically creates dead airspace underneath the hive. So it's not like they're having an airflow up through that screened bottom board, which I just find interesting. But he's done it for years, and he's got all the science and all the data behind it, and why it works the way it does. And he's shown that if you can just put a little, 1 inch, 2 inches of insulation on top of the hive, it makes a big difference in how much the hive has to expend to keep themselves warm all winter. So that's what I've been trying to do the last couple of years, and I kind of like it. No upper entrance, but some insulation on top. That's
so is your foam exposed under the top cover that you have? It's on top of your shim, but the insulation's exposed underneath your top cover then. I mean, it's the outside edge of it's exposed then.
Yeah, it is somewhat exposed.
Yeah. Okay.
It sticks up above the shim. Yeah.
Okay.
And the last few years I've just been using the white styrofoam, and it disintegrates over time. I don't like it. And in fact, I've gotten rid of all of the insulation that I've used. It just falls apart. And then
what are you using now? A different kind or?
So what I'm gonna, what most people say is go to the pink foam insulation.
Oh, okay.
Apparently the bees don't chew on it near as readily. I don't know that. I haven't tried it yet, but that's what I'm going to be using this year is the pink foam. The white foam they will chew on. And I tried covering the white foam with duct tape, and I tried covering it with some of the metallic duct tape, And it just didn't hold up.
Hmm.
And then I have little white beads all over the place in the hive, and I just. So I'm gonna try the pink stuff this year and see if that makes a difference. But yeah, I just set it down inside my shim and it sticks up above the shim a little bit. But I
Also,
think
it's
that's okay.
inside you've got to cut so it fits tight inside the shim on top
Right.
of the shim.
Yeah, it fits very tight right inside that shim.
So if a guy was building shim, I've got some shims that I used for a while with wood or cedar shavings in. I guess a guy could put his sugar and then he could slide it down inside of that shim, and it'd be with cover like I use, it'd be pretty well covered over out of the weather.
Right, right. And I haven't had any problem because I turn around and then I put tar paper over them. My lids stay on anyway because the tar paper is, wrapped. The hive's still wrapped and it keeps the lids in place anyway. So for me, it's worked okay. But I think if I were to start over building shims, I think I would build them a little bit thicker, maybe a 3-inch, so that I could have an inch of space for sugar and 2 inches of space for insulation. I think that's what I would probably do now.
So when you go to check your hives, is having them wrapped like you have them tough you have to undo it, hook it back on.
Have to undo it. Yeah. I just use a staple gun and staple it right to my hives, and then I just pull the staples out. I don't use real long staples. I just use little 3/8, just enough to tack it to the hive.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's kind of a pain. That's the one thing I don't like about wrapping hives.
See, and I've wrapped them around the sides and not over the top, but then you lose the benefit of it being up over the top too, though.
Yeah, here I do have a picture.
The picture, yeah.
Yeah, you saw the picture of how I do it. I just go up and over the top and down the other side, and I don't wrap. I don't try to wrap all the way around the hive. The tar paper isn't insulation, and I realize that it doesn't, but I think it gives a little bit of wind protection, and I think it gives a little bit of thermal gain when the sun is shining on it.
That's why I've kind of wanted it on the front of them, where most of them are facing south. I thought the sun coming from the south might build a little heat off that tar paper.
And that makes sense, and I would agree with that. My hives are kind of south to southeast to east to
Yeah.
Yeah.
I noticed wraps a couple of them together sometimes.
Yeah, I like pushing 2 hives together.
Protects that. You got 1/4 of it that's kind of building off the other one, or not building, but you don't have.
What's interesting when you do that, when you push the 2 hives together and they essentially have a shared wall between them, right? Normally you would think, well, I've got one cluster on this side and one cluster on this side, and they're acting independently of each other. But when you push those 2 hives together, what I see all the time is not a single cluster here and a single cluster here, but the 2 clusters are really like this, and they cluster against that shared wall and really make
tops you're using too, though.
right.
Yeah.
Right. If you have telescoping,
it doesn't.
Then that doesn't work.
Yeah.
But I'd be really tempted with a telescoping cover to still push my hives together, and that space between them, because you can't get them all the way together, right? I would throw a piece of
Oh, I got
insulation
you.
between them.
That's a good idea. Yeah, and if you buy a big piece, you're gonna have it out, plenty of it to do whatever.
Yeah, if you buy a big sheet of it, you're gonna have plenty of it. And I would even,
That would work. A
I
2 inch
took-
piece would fit in there just perfect, probably.
yeah.
Yeah.
I took one sheet and actually made essentially a box without a lid that I could just take and turn over and just slide right down over top of the hive. And I really liked that. The hives seem to do really well that way. But I don't have any place to store them.
Oh, yeah.
I've got this box that I have to store the rest of the year and I don't have any place to store it. It was a pain to do.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, I got to do something a little different. That
Hmm.
my storage space is very limited.
Yeah, that's true.
So I kind of quit doing that, but I do like in an inch and a half to even 2 inches of foam, that foam board insulation on top, and then close off the upper entrance. And I even had a couple of hives last year that I just use. Have you've seen the Reflectix? It's called Reflectix. It's really just a bubble insulation. It's just a sheet of bubble and it's silver on both sides. It's like it reminds you of packing bubbles, packing the pop ones that you can't resist popping, right?
Yeah.
But it's silver on both sides. And I've started putting that under the lid on all my hives. And last year I didn't have enough foam insulation to put on every one of my hives. And so I just took that and folded it over so that it essentially closed off that upper entrance. And I just left them and said, okay, let's see how you do with no upper entrance, no ventilation, but even just a little bit of insulation on top. They did great.
Hmm.
They came through just fine. I was pleasantly surprised that seemed to work okay. I had a little bit more condensation in the upper part of the box than I would have liked, but it wasn't enough that it was raining back down on the bees. And the other part of what I do is because I'm putting that shim of sugar in there, even if it does condense a little bit on the top, on the underside of that cover, when it drips back down into the sugar that I've given them. And it just moistens that sugar, which is, they've got to have some moisture in order to consume the sugar. They can't consume sugar dry.
Well, but I noticed a couple of years ago when I had some problems with the winter, was lots of snow and cold, and the hives that ate more of their sugar, I think allowed if there was condensation, I think it fell back into the hive. Does that make sense if that sugar's gone?
Yeah. Yeah. Once the sugar's gone, then it doesn't help.
You have no, yeah.
But during the
But
coldest part,
it should absorb into that sugar before it goes down the outside wall and stuff.
yeah. Yeah, that sugar does absorb some of the moisture. Which I think is a good thing. I think the bees need that extra moisture to consume the sugar. Because they can't consume sugar dry. They have to moisten it. So they've got to get that moisture from somewhere.
I'd never thought of that, but they eat it, so it must be moist, I guess.
Right.
They're breathing, and that moisture's in the hive, and so yeah.
Well, and they're like any other creature. They've got to have some water. And if the moisture is condensing on the outside walls on a warm day, some of the bees can go to the outside walls and pick up that moisture and bring it back into the cluster. You just don't want it raining back down from above on top of the cluster. I think the moisture in the hive is not as much of an issue as we make it out to be, other than when it condenses right above the cluster. I think everywhere else in the hive, I don't think the moisture is such a big deal. At least not in our area.
Yeah. Well, we're not humid either, so.
Right. Right. In other areas, that might be more of an issue, you know. Eastern US, you know, up in Maine or somewhere where they're cold and they're moist. That might be a different issue there. But I've seen pictures from Michael Palmer, who's in Vermont, and he's right up against the Canadian border. And I've seen him have his hives with 2 feet of snow on top of the hive, and basically the hive's buried in snow. And yet he leaves an upper entrance on his hives, and it's basically created a chimney right up through the snow that's melted, that lets that warm, moist air vent right off. And so, you know, he does that. He lets it vent off and seems to do just fine with it. So I'm torn that, you know, I don't want to tell anybody that, oh, don't do it that other way. Don't ever do an upper entrance, because it does work. I just think it's maybe a little more stressful on the bees that way, in my opinion. And
Yeah.
what do I know?
So I got another question for you. I hate to be talking to myself. I got another question for you. I've thought about like over your bottom entrance of hooking like a drip edge, you know, to the hive where it comes out, kind of keeps snow from collecting on the bottom board. You think that'd work?
Kind of like
Just like a piece of metal,
like an awning.
It comes out on a 45, just to keep that snow from collecting on that, you know, have it up maybe 3 or 4 inches above that, where it kept that from collecting at the entrance.
I don't think that's a bad idea at all. And that way your entrance is not as likely to get plugged in a heavy snowstorm.
Yeah.
Whereas as mine, you know, let me share my screen again here. Whereas mine, see the hive on the left has an entrance reducer and the hive on the right doesn't, because I ran out. I didn't have enough. But when it snows heavy, those entrances will get plugged. And I just kind of watch it. When we have a heavy snowstorm, I just go back out with a broom and just brush it all off. But if you had some sort of, it's almost an awning on the front porch of the hive,
Right. Yeah.
then you wouldn't have that problem, you know.
Yeah. Well, I had a hard time getting into the hives where I had them because they plowed the snow so deep and you couldn't get in there 2 years ago. And I just thought if you could do that, maybe you wouldn't have to go in there as often and mess with them.
Right. Yeah, I
mean,
bet,
it's not a guarantee,
I
but
bet somebody's already made one of those.
well, all you'd have to buy is a piece of drip edge and cut it off.
Right.
You know, with the short piece up the top and just let it. I mean, it's only gonna come out a couple inches, but it'd probably do it though.
It's not a bad idea. Then I wouldn't have to snowshoe. And like the yard that is right behind me, it's about, I don't know, 100 yards off the road.
Hmm.
And he doesn't plow down in there, right? And so in order for me to get in there when it snows, I have to put on my snowshoes to go in. Or I just trudge through, blaze my own trail.
Yeah. It'd be easy to do, just a couple screws all it'd take.
Yeah, a couple of screws on the, around the side or even on the top would be, it wouldn't take much.
Just small screws where they didn't penetrate through, just two would hold that, and it's not gonna take a lot to hold it.
Right.
You could just do it across the front there.
It's not a bad idea.
Cheap and easy to do though.
Yeah, it would be.
And in the summer, if you didn't want it, not even gonna hurt in the summer, to keep rain from getting in or something, I guess, so wouldn't even.
Yeah. I don't think it would hurt.
Might be a pain if you're trying to move them and stuff much, but
Well, if you put it on that bottom box and you decide you want to reverse boxes, then maybe it's
it'd be a pain. Yeah, but
problem then, but
screwdriver, two screws, not
Yep.
much time to jerk it off.
a couple of short screws, it wouldn't take much.
Yeah, just some 1/4-inch screws is all you'd need. 3.5 maybe.
Yeah, I bet somebody's done this already.
They probably have.
There's
I just thought,
probably somebody out there that's 3D printed one of these.
oh, that's too complicated.
It's a visor for your hive.
There you
It's
go.
a sun visor for your hive. No, I think it's makes sense. Keep that front entrance clear. I don't have much else as far as I know. Can't really say too much has changed as far as the Utah Beekeepers Association meeting this year. It'll be in February. Let me look. I think it's February 21st, 22nd, if I'm not mistaken. And it'll be in Salt Lake. It won't be at the same hotel that we've done it in the past. It's actually going to be more downtown. There's a Utah Justice League building, I think is what it's called. It's like, I'd have to go look at the address. It's like 3rd West, 4th West or something. Maybe it's 6th West or something. It's more in that downtown area. But hopefully we're going to have some more room, and we're planning on doing breakout sessions. And I'll warn you right now, they've already asked me to do one of the sessions. So I've got to come up with a presentation between now and then. And they're still working on getting speakers. He's got a few people he's still trying to get a hold of to see if he can get. But the people we're talking about should be pretty good speakers. So should be a good conference this year. All right. So what's your plan for the next month?
I will have to make a call. Probably combine the hives. I wasn't super happy with the laying pattern of the queen and the swarm hive. It's just not looking very strong. We did, we'll make sure that we don't have mites going into winter. We did just recently treat before it got to be like 101 outside. And we saw several mites before that, then we saw 0, so that's great. But we'll stay on top of that. But yeah, I really do think I'm gonna have to combine my hives, unfortunately. So, but
like I say, take your loss now. Don't try to baby it through winter if you don't think it's gonna make it.
Yeah, they're just not looking very strong. So I think I think I needed this to talk through it. So
Like I say, I mean, you can get 5, 8 frames of bees through winter if they're healthy.
right.
If they're not healthy and they're just, you know, the queen's not a good queen, she's not laying well.
Yeah. Just iffy.
Yeah. And this is exactly why I think 3 to 4 hives is kind of the optimal backyard setup.
I have had to go to IFA and Cal Ranch so many times this summer for extra frames and stuff. That's the goal now, is to have 3 or 4 hives because it's too much to just have to drop everything and go get frames. So
Yeah. I'm in the same boat, but I'm gonna be buying 50 or 60 frames, not
not just 10 at a time or 5
not
at a
10
time.
at a time. I'll be buying quite a few. I need to replace some of my boxes, and I've been doing this for 10 years now, and some of my boxes are really starting to show that
Yeah.
they're 10 years old. And because I've been selling nukes, my frames have been going away.
Oh, yeah.
5 frames go away with every nuke I sell. And I'm like, wait a minute, I don't have any frames now, and I don't have drawn comb is an issue for me. I'm struggling with getting comb drawn out quick enough to. So several of my honey supers were empty, undrawn foundation that they had to draw out before they could start to fill them. And that might also be, I'm sure that's lending to why my honey production is down, but I don't think we had a very good year out here for nectar. I just don't. It just
Yeah.
didn't seem like it was what it should have been.
This summer has felt like 2 years long because I started with a crazy swarm. So I just feel like I could not get a handle on my bees this year. So I'm just gonna take care of them, hope for the best for next year, probably. So
You'll be okay. You'll be able to
I was
take
gonna
that hive and split it next spring.
yeah, I think that's gonna be the plan. I can't imagine that I would open it up in a few days and see that they are much stronger. So, but we'll see. I don't know. They could surprise me. So, but I was gonna ask you, where do you usually buy boxes and frames? Because it's been a few years, but I feel like the boxes that we have are starting to split already. Um, and so I don't know, do you usually assemble them yourself and glue as well as nail them, or?
If you assemble them yourselves, you need to glue as well as screw or nail or staple, whatever fastener you use. I don't know that the fastener makes that much difference, because a glued joint, the wood will break before the glue joint will break. Typically, but like if you're using tight bond glue, man, that stuff, you glue a joint together, it's not coming apart. The wood's gonna break before the joint breaks usually. But when you glue and you put things together, if it's not oozing out with glue when you squeeze the box, you know, the joints together, you didn't put enough glue on it.
Okay.
It should ooze. I mean, you should think, oh wow, I put a little too much in there. No, that's about right.
Okay.
But if you use a screw though, it's gonna pull it together close enough, you're not gonna have a gap, and you'll get a better bond, I think.
Right. I usually use screws, not nails.
Okay.
The hives that I've used nails on, the nails seem to just not stay. And
I've never had one come apart, you know, but
I got in a hurry one time and didn't glue boxes and just nailed them. No,
Not good.
not good. I've used typically Man Lake boxes. Is
Okay.
usually where I bought mine. The last round of boxes that I bought though, I bought from Premier Bee Products. And their box design, their joint design, most boxes are finger joints,
Mhm.
right? These are half blind dovetail joints. Here, I'll just go to their website.
Okay.
Premier Bee Products. Here, and I'll just share my screen again.
So what, Glade, when you bought from Man Lake, what quality did you buy? You know, they got 3.
Yeah. So Man Lake, they have a commercial. I never bought the budget. And I usually didn't buy, they have like a select grade or something, which is their top end. I usually bought the middle one.
That's what I've been buying, and they've been good. They haven't had no problem. I got one time with a little warped, but most overall they've been pretty good.
Right. Right. And I would agree with that. Most of the time they're okay. But so this is a typical finger joint. And notice right here, it's kind of hard to see. This front piece is really skinny right here. Right?
Yeah, I see that.
It's really skinny right there. And this piece right here, clear across here, is what typically warps and then breaks.
Okay.
Right? And if you don't get enough glue in that joint, it'll do that. It'll just warp and break. And you notice it starts warping when your frames start to slide down too far into the box. You know, the ends don't catch the frame rests back here because the box has separated and warped enough that it doesn't catch. And this is a standard design. Lots of manufacturers use this design, and it's fine. But just glue those joints, like get some tight bond 2, tight bond 3, either one. It doesn't matter. And just be really generous with the glue. And the other thing I did was you've got exposed end grain on those joints. So end grained right here and then right here. And then, you know, you've got that exposed end grain. It's the end grain of the wood that absorbs the moisture, which is where the warping starts coming from. So when you glue them together, that glue that oozes out, spread it all over that exposed end grain on those joints and let it kind of seal those end grains up a little bit with glue. Okay. And that will help keep the moisture from absorbing up through the end grain and then warping the box. That's where the moisture gets in, is those exposed end grains. Okay. So if you're going to do that, just copious amounts of glue, let the glue ooze out, use a screw, and take a brush and brush that excess glue all over those end joints to seal them up a little bit. And that seems to help keep the box from warping quite as bad.
One thing about Man Lake too, though, is I think it's if you buy $100, they pay the freight.
Right.
Is it
150 is what?
Oh,
free shipping on 150. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, otherwise it is quite expensive, but
yeah,
I'll have to order a bunch anyway.
So that's that's a budget grade deep box. Let's back up here. Unassembled so here's the commercial, here's the middle of the line, 10 frame box, 25 bucks, right?
Mhm.
So you buy 6 of them, you're into the 150 realm.
Well, if you need frames too, I mean, you're gonna,
Yeah, if you got to have frames for them, so now you're into the free shipping.
doesn't take a lot of boxes if you're buying box of frames to
No.
get there.
No, it doesn't.
Sad but true.
So this is Premier Bee Products, and they do 150 free shipping on their orders too. But they call them Pura hives, and I like their hive bodies, and I like their frames and their foundation. I really like these boxes, but look at boy, let me see if I can find one of their pictures on. Oh. We don't. This one's not too bad. You're only the front of the box has no exposed end grain at all. And this is a dovetail joint, not a finger joint. Notice they're kind of angled. And you can't see it. There's a little better picture. So the only end grain that's exposed is on one side. It's not the other side of this. The other side doesn't have any exposed end grain at all. And they call this a half blind dovetail joint. But I've bought these boxes, and let's see if I can find, that's assembled. Let's see if we can find an unassembled one. Yeah, see their mill run, which is going to be I wouldn't call it budget grade, but it's probably more like like a commercial grade. It's not this select grade. This is the select is top of the line. There's no knots. There's no but
basically the same price, isn't it?
Yeah, but look, mill run, which is what I usually buy, 25 bucks, 25 bucks, same price. But when I assemble these boxes, when you assemble the Man Lake ones, you've really got to work to make sure that they're square and flat. You almost need to kind of build yourself a jig to assemble these with, because you've got to get them square and flat, or when you set them on your hive, they're going to rock, and there's going to be gaps in the corners because they're not square, right?
Well, if you don't build them on a true flat floor and use a carpenter square, it's pretty tough to get them set right.
Right. You can't just, it's not just a matter of, bang them together, put a couple of screws in, and away you go. You've got to really work at making sure that they're flat and square.
If you do, they'll turn out good. But
yeah, and you can do it. It's definitely, it's totally doable. But these, I didn't use a square. I actually didn't even use any nails or screws on these. And I just glued up the joints, hammered them together with a mallet. And every box that I put together, without even trying, was square and flat. Because of the way they do those joints, you can't, the joints are so tight and fit so well together. There's no wiggle room. So
It's a huge saver then, wasn't it?
yeah, time wise, these were so much easier to assemble. You glue them up, mallet, and pound them together. I had one that was cut just a little bit off, that was a little hard to get to go together, but man, these were so much easier.
That is great to know.
The way, oh, here's a picture of the corner. That top corner that's so thin. They've got, so the Man Lake box is cut off right here, but this one's got an extra 3/8 of an inch in this, on that front panel corner, to help keep that front from warping out. I think these boxes are are so much easier to use, and they were so easy to assemble. And because I was expecting to get out my square and have to kind of tweak them before and they were so tight that I decided, you know what, I'm just going to let them dry and let the glue dry. And I didn't even use a screw on them. And they were 10 times faster to assemble. And they were square and flat, every one of them. So
That is really great to know.
I really like these. They do, if you don't want to assemble them, they do something. These guys have started doing something a little different. So their typical box is called a Pura hive body, but they have what they call a propola hive body, and then they turned around and wax dipped the propola hive body. And the propola box, I guess any one of these, what they've done is they've gone in and roughened up the inside of the box. So it's not smooth on the inside anymore. It's rough. And what they found is that the bees come along and propolize in these grooves and fill the grooves with propolis. Well, there's a number of studies out there that show that propolis, a propolis envelope in the hive, really acts as part of the beehive's immune system. Propolis is antimicrobial, and so it really aids in helping keep the hive healthy. If you look at a natural beehive in a hollow of a tree, the inside of that tree where the beehive is at, the bees have propolized the entire inside of that hollowed out log. And they've propolized the entrance, and we as beekeepers, we don't like the propolis very well because they put it on the end frames, and then then you can't get the frames out, and but they've done this, they've done numerous studies with this, and they're finding that yes, it is a good idea to have a propolis envelope and let the bees build that propolis on the inside of the hive. So these guys have come up with a way to rough up the inside of the hive so that the bees will readily propolize the inside of that hive body. And then they, if you buy their assembled boxes, yeah, they're kind of pricey, but if they're wax dipped, now you don't even have to paint them. So, for $45, you can have a wax dipped, fully assembled box. You don't have to assemble it. You don't have to glue it. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to paint it because the paint's not going to stick. And a wax dipped box will last for 20 years. Just like that.
I'll take it.
Well,
That's
I'm
awesome.
like, man, $45 for a box. My goodness. I'm not sure I can afford that. You know, when you start talking, you know, in my case, right now I have 48 hives. That's a lot of money. But I've just decided, you know what, as I have to replace boxes, I would rather, I'm gonna go this way. I'm probably gonna buy the unassembled, not the wax dipped. I'd love to go the wax dipped and not have to paint anymore. But you know, here's wax dipped with frames, and the frames are double waxed. Their Pura foundation is really nice. I really quite like their frames as well. So $80 a box. But you don't have to do anything with it. Take the box as is, throw it on the hive.
Yeah.
I really kind of like that idea. Anyway.
That's super helpful. Thank you for going through those, because I've just been, you know, if I buy something from IFA or Cal Ranch, it's just like bottom of the line quality wise. And it just seems like they don't really last that long.
Yeah.
Even if they're painted or anything, or, you know, and everything. So, yeah, this is just good to know what some good companies are for sure.
Yeah. Just a comment on painting hives. Put a coat of primer on the box first.
Okay.
So get it all assembled and then put a coat of primer, like Kilt's exterior primer. You can buy it at Lowe's. It's not, but if you put a good coat of primer on the box before you paint it, and even though the paint nowadays all say paint and primer all in one, don't believe it. I don't.
Okay.
If you put a good coat of primer on it and then paint it, it lasts much longer. I can attest to that.
Okay.
So just another comment. Here's another place that I would consider buying boxes from. These guys, their boxes and their frames are pretty good. In fact, I think their frames, if you look, their frames are actually Premier foundation. The foundation in the frames actually comes from here, from Premier.
Oh.
So they build their own wooden portion, but the foundation insert is actually Premier foundation.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Does that make sense? So it's not the Premier frame. It's not the same frame as Premier makes, but it is the same foundation.
I see. Yeah.
So they make their own frames, but they use Premier B foundation to put inside them, the inserts, the black part.
Yeah.
And I quite like the Premier foundation, but from what I've seen with foundation, whether you use Premier or Acorn or any of the others, Cellrite, or they all seem to work.
Yeah.
They all work if you get a good coat of wax on top of them before you put them in the hive. If they're not coated well enough with wax, the bees don't like them. And I think that goes for any foundation. I don't think it matters.
Yeah.
But anyway, I've quite liked these Pura hive boxes. For me, it's a time saver. If all I have to do is glue, count them together, and I'm done, and I don't have to mess with trying to square them up. I've actually made a jig so that I can put the Man Lake ones together, and they're still a pain. But these were so quick and so easy. I'm like, I'm not doing I'm not doing the other anymore. And the price is so close.
Yeah.
You know, even for their select run, this is the Propola hive, so the roughed up interior, so they're a little bit more. But even the select run is only $3 more.
Right.
And they've been really nice boxes from what I've seen.
Okay.
I'll make another quick comment here. So when you buy boxes, these edges are all nice and square, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you stack boxes together, those edges are tight, really tight together, which is great. But when you come along with your hive tool and try to get between the boxes, it's really hard to get your hive tool in there right between the box without damaging the edge of the box, right?
Mm-hmm.
Without nicking off a corner. So once I get my boxes all put together, and before I paint them, I take a router with a 1/4-inch round over bit,
Mm-hmm.
and I just barely, I set the bit so it just barely takes off this outside edge.
Okay.
Just chamfers it a little bit, just rounds it over just a little bit. And then I do it on the top and on the bottom of the box as well. Now, when I come along with my hive tool, it creates just a little bit of a groove to where the hive tool slides right between the boxes, right where it's supposed to be. It's not a big groove, and it's not, I'm not taking a whole lot of material off the corner, but it's just enough that it makes putting my hive tool between the boxes and knowing that I'm right between the boxes and I'm not going to damage the edge of the box. I started doing that on my boxes. I really like doing it.
That's a great suggestion, because that has been one of our issues, because we keep like taking little chunks out of the
Yeah. Every time you miss just a little bit, you take a little chunk out of the corner of the box, and it's like, oh, and now, and I've seen boxes with some of these old beekeepers that have been, you know, these boxes have been around for years, and the corners are all completely worn off. I mean, they're just from that hive tool going in there. And I thought, oh, there's got to be a better way to do that. So I just take a little bit of I just use a round over bit, like a little 1/4-inch round over bit. And I don't even take off a 1/4 inch. I'm taking off like a 1/16 of an inch, just enough to round that corner a little bit on both the top and the bottom. And now my hive tool slides right where it needs to. And I know when I'm trying to get between the boxes, my hive tool's where it needs to be, and I'm not damaging the corners near as bad. Yeah,
that's a great suggestion. Yeah. Okay, so that'll be part of my plan too when we get to boxes.
Yeah, that's usually winter. That's usually winter chores, is to go through the boxes and go through the frames and figure out, you know, what's still good. During the summer, I'm trying to, and if I come across a frame that's broken or breaking, I try to move it to the outside of the box. And I'll even push it up into the honey super if I can, if it's just got honey in it. Okay. If it's got brood in it, then I try to push them to the outside of the boxes during the summer. And once I get it to the outside and it's kind of empty, then I'll yank it out and put a fresh frame in.
Okay.
And then sometimes, so in the spring, so I overwinter in 3 boxes, right? Mm-hmm. But in the spring, those bees have moved up into the top 2 boxes, usually leaving the bottom box empty.
Right.
Pretty much, right?
Mhm.
So I have a little bit of time there. I'll go yank that bottom box out and I'll
Okay.
go through it, cull out any frames or comb that's yucky or frames that are breaking and replace those frames with new ones. And then hurry and give it right back to the bees. You know, you usually have a month in there where that bottom box is not hardly being used at all. And I can usually go in and yank that out, kind of go through the frames, replace anything that's yucky or broken or the combs, you know, old and black. And so I take advantage of the fact that the bees have all vacated that bottom box and hurry and go through it before I throw it back on the hive.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's helpful too, yeah, because they're always in the top, so.
Yeah, they've moved up to the top. The bottom box is usually empty. So yank it out, hurry and fix whatever needs to be fixed, and then give it back to them. And I usually give it back to them on top, which creates empty space above the cluster. And now they feel like, oh, we got extra space and we got extra room and we need to move up. Now they don't want to swarm. And, right?
Yeah. I should have done that this year.
Unless they have a mind of their own and they just swarm anyway.
Oh, but that's good to know, though. Yeah, I have my list of things that I want to refresh over the winter, so that'll be good.
Yeah, me too. And I never have enough time to do it. And my shop's cold. And it's
Yeah.
cold out there in the winter and I don't want to go out and work in it.
That's the other limiting factor, so.
Put a furnace in it.
All right, well, it's 8 o'clock.
Well, thank you. It's good to come back and get some thoughts on what my crazy bees are doing this crazy summer. So.
Well, I don't think yours is any crazier than the rest of ours.
Thanks, Clegg. We appreciate what you do.
It just has not been a great honey year, but
Yeah.
we'll try again next year.
Yep. Keep on doing what we're doing.
We keep doing it. We must like it.
Yeah, I guess so.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
You too. Bye.